Welcome, everyone. I'm Misha Jain, Director of Growth at Reimagine, and today we are thrilled to kick off our transformative three-part series, Transforming Adversity into Acts of Service. We'll explore the profound impact of acts of service on our personal growth and the communities around us. Together, we'll learn how to channel our adversity into meaningful action and foster a sense of belonging in the face of loss and challenge. Thank you all so much for joining us on this inspiring journey. If you want to, drop where you're zooming in from in the chat, we would love to know. And rest assured, we are recording this event for those unable to attend live or for those who might need to hop off early today. So I'm excited to announce today's program. We're honored to have with us Shekinah Eliassen, the remarkable CEO of George Mark Children's House, who will be joining us soon to share her insights and guide us through this transformative journey. And then we will be diving into our panel discussion. Leading the conversation will be Shekinah herself, and alongside her, we have a distinguished panel of experts: Becca Bernstein, head of Option B; Marisa Renee Lee, author and former staff in the Obama administration; and Julian Pistone, co-founder of Courage, formerly at Google. These brilliant minds will explore the transformative potential of service in times of adversity and how it can inspire personal growth and meaningful change. As we journey through these discussions, we encourage you to engage with us by sharing your thoughts in the chat. And following our panel, we'll also have time for a 10-minute Q&A session, allowing you to interact with our panelists by asking questions in the chat as well. And as we approach the end of our event, we'll have a brief closing to wrap up our exploration of unearthing the power of service amid adversity. Thank you, Nicole, my colleague at Reimagine, for also supporting me at today's event. So now it's my honor to bring Shekinah into this space and also share a bit about her background with you all. Shekinah is a seasoned professional with over 20 years of experience in business strategy, brand management, and e-commerce. She's passionate about purpose-driven organizations and has left her mark across the world in Boston, New York, San Francisco, and London, driving brand innovation at Unilever and Clorox. And in 2012, Shekinah faced profound personal adversity, losing her first son, Lars, to a terminal brain condition. This tragedy ignited her dedication to philanthropy and service-focused organizations. Her connection to the heartwarming George Mark Children's House in San Leandro, California, is where she cherished moments with Lars, and that's become a cornerstone of her life. As of last October, Shekinah is now the CEO of George Mark and leads the provision of palliative care for children and families in the Bay Area. With an incredible husband, Peter, and two energetic children, Finley and Isaac, by her side, she exemplifies commitment to service and compassion. Thank you so much for being a part of this event today, Shekinah, and personally, thank you. You've been a huge support in preparing for this event and also supporting the Reimagine community. Okay, I can hear you now. Yes.
Hello, everybody. Hey. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I transferred to my phone, so I'm just calling you from my phone, but you can hear me okay, it sounds like.
Yes, we can hear you. Okay, great. Shekinah, thank you so much for leading our panel today. Before we introduce our other panelists, I wanted to ask you a question or two about the power of service amid adversity in your own personal life. I mentioned briefly in your introduction that your journey has been shaped by professional accomplishments and deeply personal experiences with loss, including the loss of your son Lars in 2012, and then your mother soon after to late-stage cancer only 18 months later. I'm curious, how has this combination of profound adversity combined with your business expertise influenced your perspective on service and purpose-driven work?
Well, first of all, again, it's such an honor to be here and be part of this conversation. So thank you so much, and really excited to be a part of this. So as I think back, so my personal professional journey have really been intrinsically linked in the ways that I really never could have fathomed. And honestly, purpose and service have been a consistent thread. So well before the loss and the birth of our son Lars in 2012. He lived 3 short weeks. He had a brain abnormality and died after 3 weeks in 2012. And then 18 months later, I also lost my mother to late-stage cancer, all of which have intrinsically changed and transformed my life and the life of my family. But even before those moments, I studied international business with the intent of learning marketing so that I could learn the levers of marketing and behavior change for some cause. I didn't know exactly what that cause was, but I did know that I wanted to pursue marketing and strategy so that I could influence lives for good. And then as it turned out, my life evolved into having this beautiful son that brought us to George Mark and the corporate background that I do have. So it's really been a fascinating journey, and it still is every day. And I'm living that and learning that in my role today.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's really been amazing taking the time to hear your broader story and how your experience at George Mark has brought you to where you are today in your career, building on your previous experience. So in your role as CEO, I know George Mark provides respite and palliative care for children and families facing challenging medical conditions. And I'm wondering if you could share how acts of service play a vital role in supporting these families and individuals during their times of adversity, and then also the staff at George Mark themselves.
Absolutely. So one other piece that I've found has been so useful as I've transitioned from a corporate marketing digital world into this act of service around George Mark is the concept of servant leadership. And that's something that I've studied in my 20 years in corporate marketing and worked with leaders in which we help build and develop myself and others to lead and to serve each other in whatever cause that we're pursuing. And one of my favorite quotes is that leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. And as I've now come to George Mark, and the nursing staff, the volunteers, the operations staff, the medical staff, everyone is part of this mission to ensure that the families that we serve, the siblings, and all of the concentric circles around the care of those families that are going through a trying time are getting support. George Mark provides palliative pediatric care, which is a continuum of care from diagnosis through treatment, all the way into life-serving care, whether it's end of life or children who have a life-limiting disability. And really, it's about ensuring that the staff are being cared for so that they can continue to care for the families and patients that we serve. And it's such an honor to be part of this journey. I never, in my wildest thought, that I would be back one day to George Mark a decade after our son lived and died at this magical place. And it just is a little bit of a testimony of things happen in life that you cannot predict why they happen or what the kind of outcome of that adversity will be. But I'm just so filled with joy that I can do this now and serve the community that served us and continue to grow and be an advocate for pediatric palliative care, which is such an underserved care in the US and abroad.
Thank you so much for sharing, Shekinah. It really is beautiful to see the virtuous cycle that has come out of you being supported and then supporting others, both families and staff at George Mark, through your acts of service and their acts of service. And so I wanted to share a bit about you before we really kick things off. I think people will agree that you're well positioned to lead this panel. And so with that, I will turn it over to you to introduce our speakers today.
Well, great. Thank you for that introduction. And I am so thrilled to be able to introduce 3 incredible speakers and guests today. I've not yet had the pleasure of meeting you all in person, but I'm so excited to have a conversation with you. And I know that our visitors and guests will as well. So the first guest that I would like to introduce is Becca Bernstein. And I'm going to read a short bio and then ask Becca a question, then we'll go on to the next guest. So I can't yet see Becca. Can everybody see Becca? Yes? Okay, good. There you are, Becca. Okay, great. So Becca, I'm just going to read your bio and then we'll jump into a question. So please join me in welcoming Becca Bernstein. Becca has devoted their career to transforming the way we talk about and heal from loss and hardship. For 4 years, they have served as the National Community Director of the Dinner Party, connecting grievers in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s to foster peer community and support. Becca is also the founder of Collective Care Consulting and Trainings, where they strive to deepen connections in an age of loneliness and isolation. Currently, Becca leads as the head of Option B from the Sheryl Sandberg, Dave Goldberg, and Tom Bernthal Family Foundation, providing education and support to over 18 million people facing loss and hardship. So welcome, Becca. We are so excited to hear the insights of how you have transformed adversity into acts of service. So my first question for you, Becca, is your dedication to transforming the way that we talk about and heal from loss and hardship is truly inspiring. Can you share with us how your work with the Dinner Party Collective, Care Consulting and Trainings, and Option B has shaped your understanding of the transformative power of service in the face of adversity?
Such a big question. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be with you all today. And, got to meet some of the other speakers before, and just, really honored to be with everyone. I could talk about, my different roles and my career, but I think, I would love with just starting with my own experience of loss and hardship and kind of how that became a catalyst for me. So I lost my mom to ALS and frontotemporal dementia when I was in my 20s. And around the same time, I went through the end of a relationship that really felt like a divorce, which is something that I would love for us to continue talking about as a form of loss. And then more recently, I've struggled with infertility. And so those are, sort of three major moments of adversity in my own life. And in terms of doing the work that I do, a lot of people think, oh, Becca just loves grief, which is a wild thing to say. Oh, you just love grief. And I think I often have to clarify for people, it's not that I love grief. It's that grief has and adversity have been my biggest teachers. And so they've really inspired me to live the biggest, boldest, most meaningful life that I can live. And that means never knowing how much time you have, never knowing how much time the people in your life have, and really making sure that we center generosity and love and perspective in all of our lives. And so I think, when I look to my career, each of those roles has required different things. But it's been, wanting to convey those messages to more people, that we don't know how much time we have. How can we live boldly? How can we live meaningful lives? And how can we make sure that love and service are sort of at the center of it? And so I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that until it's too late. We hear, we hear from people who are sort of on their deathbeds, like, wow, what did I just give my life to, And in some ways I don't feel lucky for the losses that I've gone through, but I feel lucky that I realized at an early age, this is what life is all about. How can I devote myself to that? So, yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that overview. And also thank you for the vulnerability. I mean, I think all of us in this panel, so much of what it is the bravery and the courage to talk about what we've been through and sharing with others. So there's more of a conversation around it amongst each other, around the different types of loss too, relationship loss, all these things. But the first step is the bravery and the vulnerability. So we'll come back to that and how you're helping others. Thank you for that. So I think we're going to go on now and introduce our next guest, Marisa Renee Lee. So Marisa, I'm going to also read your bio, which is beautifully written. So we have the privilege of having Marisa Renee Lee with us today, a called upon grief advocate, entrepreneur, and best-selling author of Grief is Love. Marisa's research-based advice and wisdom have been a guiding light for many in navigating the complexities of loss, particularly offering unique insights for women and Black communities. Beyond her work in the grief space, Marisa has been a former appointee in the Obama White House and CEO of Beacon Advisors, focusing on racial equity. She is a driving force in social healing, co-founding the digital platform Supportal and founding the Pink Agenda, dedicated to raising money for breast cancer research and awareness. A Harvard graduate and expert contributor to numerous media outlets, Marisa's commitment to service and advocacy is truly commendable. So welcome, Marisa. We're so happy to have you here as well.
Thank you.
Yes, welcome. And so our first question is around your work as a grief advocate, entrepreneur, and best-selling author of your book, Grief is Love. It has touched so many lives, providing invaluable insights for individuals navigating loss. Could you share with us just a little bit about how your personal experiences and expertise has shaped your understanding of transformation and transforming adversity into acts of service?
Yes.
I also just want to say, welcome. I know your family is going through a very traumatic time right now.
Yeah.
I just want to honor that and leave space for that. And just thank you for your courage with being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And for context for folks, we just put my mother-in-law on hospice last week. She is not ironically dying from the same thing that killed my mom almost 15 years ago. And separately, on the other side of the family, we recently learned that a cousin who was missing for a few weeks, unfortunately, was killed. And so we are dealing with all of the grief on all sides, all at once right now. And I just want to take a second before getting to the transformation piece to address a comment I saw in the chat from Karen. I lost your last name, Karen, but you said, and I agree with this 1,000%, and I actually talk about this in Grief is Love, grief can be about any kind of loss. It doesn't just have to be the physical loss of someone you love. And I tend to think about it as it feels like grief when the thing that you lose is connected to a reasonable future that you had planned on. So whether that is the loss of a partner, the loss of good health, the loss of fertility, the loss of a job or career opportunities that you expected to have, it's all grief. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Every single thing that you shared in my bio, for better or worse, is rooted in grief and loss. My mom first got sick when I was 13, and it took years to figure out what was wrong with her, but it turned out she had multiple sclerosis. A few years after she was diagnosed with MS, we realized as I was getting ready to graduate from college that she also had stage 4 breast cancer. And so I ended up taking a year off to just help my parents manage this very complicated and difficult health situation. And then when I decided I was ready to go back to work and, continue helping mom and dad part-time, that's when I started the Pink Agenda, the breast cancer organization, because for me, it wasn't enough to just help take care of my mom. I realized the day that she was diagnosed, she was going to die. I was not going to be able to stop that. But what could I do? What could I put out into the world that might help save somebody else's mom? And that is just the way that I think about everything in my life. And, if you're tuning in, I never want people to feel pressured to make meaning out of hardship. But for me personally, it connects deeply to something that my friend Becca mentioned, which is generosity. My mom was a deeply, deeply generous person. And so for me, finding ways to connect with her legacy now that she's no longer here always points me in the direction of service and generosity. And when it comes to transformation and how I think about transformation and loss and service, for me, it's all rooted in love. The day that we lose either something or someone that we loved, we are transformed. You are a different person, whether it was following a significant relationship that didn't work out or the loss of someone you loved. And you have to figure out how to live with that loss indefinitely. And for me personally, service has been a really big, important, and healing part of that journey.
Thank you for that. So powerful. And we can unpack that as we move through the conversation. But generosity, you're oozing with that and all the things that your career is doing. And it's such a powerful gift to all of us. So thank you. Thank you. And I'm excited to read your book as well. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our third guest, and then we'll do a little bit of a conversation. So we're now going to be welcoming Julian Pistone. Hope I'm pronouncing that right, Julian. Italian. He's joining us as a Buddhist practitioner with a decade of experience at Google, leading well-being initiatives across Europe and Latin America. Julian's journey has been shaped by significant adversities, including the loss of his father to cancer and a challenging health battle. In response, he co-founded Courage. conducting death contemplation retreats, uniting global changemakers and embracing mortality as a catalyst for greater purpose and societal impact. Julian's courage has led him to speak at prestigious platforms like TEDx and LEAP, while producing an interview series on adversity and loss with award-winning filmmaker Joshua Sage. We're honored to have Julian here to share his profound insights on how service can transform adversity into meaningful actions. Welcome, Julian. So happy to have you.
But maybe even before starting, I just wanted to just take a second to acknowledge what Marisa said earlier, and just to send you lots of courage and love from this side of the world to you and to your family.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And and also to say I'm really moved to be on this panel because maybe I'll share a bit more about the adversities that I've been through. But in my darkest times, I usually live in Colombia, and I'm right now visiting my mom. So this is my childhood bedroom, which is as messy as it used to be as a teenager. But this is where I spent a lot of my illness. Next door is where my father passed away. And at the peak of my illness, I read Option B twice. It was one of my important anchors. And so I was telling Mika the fact that, I'm now on a panel with Becca. It really means the world to me. Marisa, I've seen you speak at Google Talks, which is like the TED Talk at Google, and actually at an event that I helped organize a couple of years ago. So it means the world to me. And she's been after hearing the story, what a role model. And I'm delighted to be. It really means a lot.
Yeah. Yes, welcome. It is so delightful to have this collective experience and the journeys that we're all on. So Julian, your journey has influenced you starting Courage and bringing people into the conversation about death. Could you just share a little bit about how that has transformed you and how it continues to bring service to others?
Yeah, and maybe I can give it a bit of context as to like what the adversity was and what happened. You mentioned earlier the loss of my father, and then shortly after I had a spine injury which left me paralyzed with the risk of quadriplegia and extreme chronic pain, that someone was drilling into my nerve. That went on for like a year, pretty much day and night. And then after surgery 3, I managed to make a recovery, but then I was hit with an illness called ME, CFS, which is a neurological disease, which often hits you after prolonged physical and emotional trauma. I was given like a 5% full recovery rate. So that was like marathon 2, which this is where I was telling you earlier. I was in this house actually because my mother is a doctor, and she was caretaking of me. And eventually I made it out of that as well. I was part of those 5% that make it through. And it really transformed my life in so many ways. There's, they say adversity builds character. I'm more of a proponent of adversity is what reveals character. And how it shows just how resourceful you really are, and just that shows you just how brave and courageous you are. And during the entire period, one way of getting myself out of this incredible amount of panic and fear and uncertainty, I became literally obsessed with the topic of courage. So I started reading everything around Buddhist psychology and Pema Chodron, which I'm sure you all have heard of, and Divine Holidays, and Option B actually read twice, and all the research. There's not much on it, but all the research on courage, and throughout the entire time, I kept asking myself, one, there must be some sort of meaning in this, like what's the gift from this entire experience? And then another question which would pop up a lot at the time was, did I really live up to my full potential? And the answer for me at the time was no, because I'd spent an entire lifetime up until that point living a very self-centered life, really focused on seeking significance and validation and trying to climb the career ladder, and distracting myself predominantly not to feel pain, and a very hedonistic lifestyle, which was all great and fun until it wasn't. And so from that was born this urge to share what I've learned throughout these 2 years about what courage is, what the mechanics are, what it's not, how to build it, And one of the you mentioned earlier the word not gifting, but it was generosity. And one of the acts of generosity in Buddhism is the act of dana, dana of courage, which is giving others the gift of fearlessness, making others fearless, which is something that I'm sure everyone listening to this have done many times before. That's sitting next to a friend who's ill, or the people working palliative care. That's what they do as a vocation and work. Is giving courage to others, and so yeah, that kind of transformed into my mission. And so I left Google a year ago. I'm fully dedicated to this. I started the retreat series you mentioned earlier. I started the interview series, or I'm about to start the interview series you mentioned, and it's been such a life-changing experience. It feels so much more alive. It feels so much more meaningful, and I've healed a lot. Marisa mentioned it earlier as well. I think the whole process of helping others has healed me tremendously. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And it sounds like you're really just beginning the beginning of this next journey, right? A year into it, I cannot even imagine. We'll come back to the things you're continuing to do and you're seeing as people are evolving through Courage and your other ventures. So maybe I'll move to Marisa actually and ask you a question, and then we'll just continue the conversation, because I'm really curious about your book, Grief is Love, and the research-based advice around complex emotions of loss. And how do you believe that acts of service can play a transformative role in the healing process, especially as we're all going through a healing process of grief and loss now, to empower individuals? What are the tools and the kind of the service elements that you provide in your book that you could share with this audience?
Yeah, happy to. So I'll share like a couple key themes from the book, and then I'll also speak to the data and research that I've seen around service, particularly when you're struggling. So a few big themes in the book, and the whole book writing process for me, and Becca knows a bit of this, it was pretty wild. I went from, having this idea to write this book about 6 months after my mom died. So August of 2008. And in 2020, after a pregnancy loss that kind of brought up a lot of the I wish my mom was still here type of grief feelings, I started writing like crazy. An article I wrote went somewhat viral, and by the end of the summer, I had a book deal. And I wrote Grief is Love basically over the first 6 months of 2021, and then realized pretty quickly that I wrote the wrong book. Yes, it is a book about grief, but I realized fundamentally I needed to write a book about healing. What are the things that I have embraced in my life? At that point, I'd been living with the loss of my mom for over 12 years. Like, how do I get to have this big, joyful, fun, life of the party kind of life, even in the midst of all of this grief? And so I started rewriting the book in July of 2021. And 6 weeks later, my husband and I got a call that a birth mom had selected us, and we became parents to a newborn. So the book barely made it into the world. Thankfully, it did. And it wasn't finished when the baby showed up, but I would say a lot of it was absolutely influenced by his arrival and just kind of seeing the transformative process of life and comparing it with the transformative process of death and loss. And it was an intense time. But some of the big themes that I touch on in Grief is Love, like chapter 1, the longest chapter and the most foundational piece of the book, is the concept of permission. We all exist, for better or worse, in a grief-averse society. And so you need to start the healing process by just giving yourself permission to grieve. So whether it is a relationship, someone you love who's no longer here, serious illness, infertility, etc., give yourself permission to sometimes just really be sad or angry or overwhelmed or whatever else comes up without feeling bad about it. The other thing I wanted to do in the book was really dig into the research around, what are the things we know are helpful to most people when you're dealing with or encountering grief and loss. And one of the big things that I found that was very harmful, that I encourage people to get rid of, is this idea of the 5 stages of grief. Becca has heard me rant on this a few times in option B forums, but I really want people to know that the 5 stages of grief and the brilliant research that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross conducted, it was not meant for us. Like, that research was being done on people who were terminally ill themselves, which is very different from you being a person who just experienced a loss. And so if you're struggling, feeling like, oh, I didn't go through that stage, or, I maybe went through this one too fast, or I never experienced that at all, you're not doing grief wrong. Give yourself a break, get rid of any timelines or expectations that you have, and just let yourself be and feel and process. The primary research that sort of sits beneath everything in Grief is Love is something called the continuing bonds theory, which argues that one of the healthiest ways to move through the most challenging parts of grief and sort of find our path to living with loss is by identifying for yourself how you're going to continue to have a relationship with your person who's no longer here. So for me, I talked a bit about generosity. That's a big one for me, and it is absolutely one of the ways that I continue to honor my mom and maintain that relationship and keep her alive, even though she's been gone for 15 years. My mom was also a really big food person and a great cook. So like, if you come to my house, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to take care of you. Like, it's going to be like the way my mom took care of me, because I know that it can really help people, and that it's just nice to have that comfort and care and something delicious to eat sometimes. And so I always encourage people to just think about, what are some of the things that you either learned from this person or that you felt that they poured into you, and how can you bring those things to life in the world? Because I think when we're able to figure those things out, it really does help us heal. I feel like there was another part to the question that I forgot to answer.
No, I think it was really about how the tools that you provide for people, and there's so many in what you've talked about. From a personal perspective, my mother was diagnosed with late-stage cancer when I was pregnant with my daughter, my second child, after I had lost my son. So here I was pregnant with a healthy baby, hopefully, and my mother was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. I fly from California to the East Coast to be with her while she's going through chemo. And grieving still the loss of my son. But these things, they're so intertwined, as you're saying, right? And the space to grieve. I did not have a linear grieving process either, giving space to grieve. And then this concept of post-traumatic growth, which the Reimagine team has actually had shared with me as I've stepped into George Mark. I don't know if Becca, maybe in your journeys with the collective care consulting and trainings and working with participants around loneliness and isolation, is there anything that you would want to offer in this conversation around the work you're doing and how it connects to either something Marisa said, just around the journey and post-traumatic growth of grieving and serving?
Yeah, well, I think this topic is really interesting. Post-traumatic growth is a focus also of the Option B book, right? And it's central. This idea that, when we go through really hard things, that can help us to grow. But I think I also want to pick up on something that Marisa said earlier that I think our culture and society has a harder time with, which is we can grow, and post-traumatic growth is extremely important. And also, especially coming out of a global pandemic, I feel like the message that people need to hear is it's okay to slow down. And we need to give ourselves permission to heal and to grieve. And so I think, it was interesting even thinking about this topic of adversity and service. Absolutely, adversity can lead to service. And also, I think, one of the things that I see people wrestle with in the Option B community is, when is it time for me to be of service to others? And when is it time for me to just like take a deep breath and tend to myself, and that kind of like internal battle that can happen a little bit. And so I know we see that a lot in the Option B community, but certainly there's a lot of research on the ways that people can grow after loss. Adam Grant has been a huge part of that research, and he was, the co-author of Option B, the book. But I think that, I really resonated with what Marisa said around living in a grief-averse society, and what does it mean to have a broader conversation around how we actually find the time to heal. What does that look like, and how do we create that for other people? And we're cooking some things up at Option B around that topic, actually, which I would love to talk about later.
Yes, well, thank you for putting a spotlight on that, because it is so true. And the pause and the time and the space, and even the conversation with those who have lost someone, for those who haven't, that's another, how do you broach that subject with a friend or a peer or a colleague or someone who has lost someone? It's a bit of an awkward conversation to have. I often felt like I never had many forums to say my son's name because it didn't come up in conversation, and people felt awkward bringing it up. And now that I'm at George Mark and I talk about sick and dying kids all the time, I do get to say his name. I get to talk about him and that journey, but the space, providing the space for others like you're talking about, I'd love to hear more about what Option B is doing to provide that space to hold and to have a community around that. So let's come back to that. Maybe we go on to Julian. You've posed a question to me online about talking about the benefits of contemplating death and conversations around that. This might be a good time to hear your thoughts on that one.
Just it's quite a morbid topic now. So why would you even spend time to contemplate what the benefits are of contemplating death? And there's I don't know if you're familiar with Carlos Castaneda, the American proven writer, who basically says death is, I think, it's the wisest advisor. So how can you use that wise advisor to live a life, to live and die more fully? And there's kind of three buckets that I use if anyone's interested in hearing about the benefits of death contemplation in a lot more detail. I strongly recommend an AI scientist who then turned one of the most important Buddhist teachers on the topic of death contemplation. And maybe we can share the links later. But her name is Nikki Mirgafori. If you Google Nikki death contemplation, usually she jumps out. But effectively, I'll focus on three. So in essence, it's bringing into mind and bringing into awareness the scarcity of time in life. And that gives you the opportunity to live and love more fully and more authentically. And it can also sharpen. I'm sure people can.
Hey, Julian, sorry, Julian, I just saw in the chat, there's a little bit of commentary that it's still a little hard to hear you. Could you maybe speak a little closer to the microphone? It's just a little broken up.
Sure. If it keeps being bad, what I'll do is I'll disconnect and I'll reconnect with another microphone. So just give me a heads up.
Okay.
You just make a signal, stop me, and I'll disconnect, reconnect with the microphone because I'm using headphones. So the first one is about living more fully, more authentically, and I'm sure people who have been with someone at the point of death can empathize with this. But it's when colors, when sensations become more and more crisp, and you're suddenly more in the now. It allows you to discern more, whether it's people you spend time with, whether it's things that you invest your time with. Do I invest more time in my career, or do I invest my time more in kinds of service? Do I invest my time more in social media, or do I invest my time in reaching out to a friend? It helps you, I think, in taking courageous decisions, which are much more aligned with who you are as a human being, and much more aligned with the true self. The second one is around gratitude. So gratitude around even the most simple moments of life. It's contemplating gratitude and compassion. Something I bring to mind now that I'm spending time with my mom. It's while we're quarreling, we're both dying, and that's already dead. So let's stop bickering. And the third one is around preparation for death, and it's preparation for death, for our own death, and it's preparation for the death of others. And being more prepared in that sense for death is a huge gift, in the sense that it can give you that intimacy at the moment of death. Again, whether it's you dying or it's someone you love who's dying, and having that peace and having that intimacy and having that ability to be in the moment is, as opposed to clinging, as opposed to not wanting to let go, is a humongous gift for the person who's dying and for the people who are around them. And in Buddhism, they say that the actual moment of death, if you've been contemplating it, can actually be a tremendous moment of liberation, of potential nibbana, of transcendence and awakening. So these are kind of the three main ones. And again, Dr. Nick is the expert, and should come up with an even longer list than the ones I've mentioned.
And how has the workshops, the Courage, how have those enabled people to, it sounds like, kind of contemplate and transform through the process of contemplating getting closer to death? Can you help us understand or walk us through that a little bit?
Sure, maybe a bit of context as to what these retreats are. So what we do is we work with anthropologists. We work with.
All right, sorry, Julian, we've just lost you briefly again. Maybe call back in if that's okay, just so that we have a good experience for our guests, and then I will rejoin us. Okay, great, thank you.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, Becca, so let's go back to you. Obviously, if there's anything that was addressed that you just want to jump in and connect to, please, I welcome that. I would love to hear also about your work in Option B and some of the amazing things you're doing around education and support, and about the Grief Awareness Day that's coming up. But anything else you want to connect for us would be great.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that I want to say, and so many different points to connect.
I know.
But I think, on the theme that we were talking about before with how to give people time and space to heal and to grieve, a lot of that change, I believe, needs to be structural. Like, it can't just be individual. And so this August 30th is Grief Awareness Day, and Option B is going to be releasing 2 new resources that help people to advocate for workplace leave in their own settings. And this is something that we heard from our community was missing. They didn't have anything that they could use to advocate for their own need to have time to grieve and to heal. And then we also will have a resource for HR leaders, so that leadership can be helping to make this change as well. And I think, again, on the surface, it can sound like it's about bereavement policy, and sometimes people's eyes will kind of glaze over, like, yes, this group all cares about it, but it can be something that maybe is overlooked. But I think I really think about it as a fight for our humanity. When you lose someone, or when you are at someone's deathbed, or when you're going through a miscarriage, the idea that what you're having to worry about is your shift or a slide deck is unacceptable, especially coming out of a pandemic. So really, that's what we see Grief Awareness Day being about. And I think the other piece of this is giving people the opportunity to advocate, particularly people who have experienced loss and hardship, which can feel a little confusing. It's like, oh, I had this really horrible thing happen to me, and now you're asking me to do work, But I think, part of what we've heard is people just don't have the tools and information to be able to advocate. And so I see that as part of Option B's role, is to give people the tools and the education and the information to be able to advocate for themselves. And then the HR leaders sort of, the same thing. And so that's something that we've been cooking up that is launching on August 30th. And yeah, very, very excited to be putting that out in the world. And I think directly applies to this idea of experiencing adversity and turning it into service and advocacy for yourself and for others.
Mm-hmm. What a great movement. I will absolutely help advocate for that. Love it. So important and so powerful. And thank you for creating the space for that more broadly. Marisa, did you want to jump in? Oh, sorry, Marisa, did you want to jump in and add anything to that?
I mean, I was going to say 1,000% on board. I sent Becca a message, like, I am ready to amplify all of that. I love it. So yeah, that's just really wonderful. Oh, Julian's back.
Yes, welcome back, Julian.
Hello, everyone. Is it working? Test, test, test.
Yes,
Way
much
better. Yes.
Way better. Do you want? Because that's my fancy podcasting one.
No, wow. Well,
I should have used it way before.
no, thank you, Julian. No, thank you for your flexibility. Absolutely. So you
Sorry
were
about
just
that.
No, we're flexible. You were just telling us, we were just talking a little bit about what Becca is launching on August 30th for Grief Awareness Day to advocate for us all being able to take space to grieve. And we're all going to be helping her support that because it's a really powerful and important movement. We interrupted you though. You were telling us a little about the Courage program and how that is a catalyst for helping people change and transform to be kind of living the life that they want to lead. Anything else you want to add about that?
Yeah, so as a bit of a context, so we started this a couple of years ago, and it kind of started off as an experiment. And the experiment was, what if we work together with anthropologists in Latin America, and we get the support of some of the pioneers in psychedelic assisted therapy? So we're talking, people with 40, like really the pioneers in the sector, so like 40 plus years experience in transpersonal psychotherapy. And then what if we start like kind of handpicking people that can have impact at scale. So from a war zone correspondent to a women empowerment activist to an environmentalist, advocates to impact investors and creatives and musicians and humanitarians. And what if you bring them all together in places that's still steeped in ancestral wisdom. So this could be in Colombia, in Guatemala, and the people don't really know who the other people are because we don't talk about what we do. The objective is that we spend an entire week and then the follow-up program really reflecting on what Brené Ware calls the number one regret of the people at the point of death, which I'm sure you're all aware of. I didn't have the courage to live a life true to myself. I wish I didn't live according to what others expected of me. And so these are the 1 week experience before the follow-up program are really an opportunity to go, we call it, it's almost like a deep dive, like submerging yourself into your soul and into your subconscious, and a way to tap into, in some cases, childhood trauma and whatever fears that are there that aren't blocking us from living a more authentic life. And it's all designed around Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which again, I'm sure all of you know, in the etymology of the word hero comes from servo, servant, to something greater than yourself. And so to then transmute into a hero, the act of service, the bringing back the elixir to the world, that's really the key part. So we reflect on the question of the Buddha, which is, the days are passing relentlessly. What are you going to do with that precious time? And the idea of the experiment then was, once people, over the time start understanding who the other people are in the group, they start supporting each other's mission. And they commit to service, not just for themselves, but really going beyond and supporting each other as mentors, as friends, as community, as a collective. And then we started, that's how it was born. And it's that you asked what the benefits are for the people themselves. I think we harness the insights that arrive. In some cases, they're very painful, even memories that can come up during these experiences. But we use those insights to help participants effectively realign their values with what they're doing in life, and to live more fully, to love more fully, to take decisions that are uncomfortable and difficult, whether it's to leave a relationship, whether it's to leave an abusive marriage, whether it's to whether it's to start that sustainability project that have been dreaming of, and not keep investing time in taking and craving in trying to achieve and accomplish, to quiet that voice that says I'm not good enough, but really to choose with intention what and how they're going to serve in the last years of their lives, and use their time and use their resources and use their connection and use their gifts really in service of the collective. And and the goal is then that becomes then a catalyst for impact and for hopefully a more aligned living. And it keeps me also on track to walk the talk and not just give presentations.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So powerful. And I'm sure you experience a continuum of kind of insights as you walk through those journeys with that group, and those groups share with each other. Are there any, I see that Misha has given us a 10-minute warning, so thank you. Are there any last thoughts, maybe Julian, and then we'll go around, that you would want to send to the group, maybe insights from those workshops that people can take into their lives, or, day to day, or just anything you'd like to share as a final thoughts as we go around the table?
One thing that I learned in studying Buddhism is that one of the biggest acts of generosity, in fact, some lineages actually call it the biggest act of generosity, is the dana, the gift of fearlessness. And I alluded to it earlier. That's something that we can all give, all of us. Every single person on this panel, we know, every person I'm sure listening to this has been through adversity, they've been through pain, they've been through loss. And they've all been courageous, again, whether it's, people who've, despite depression, decided to get up in the morning, or despite being in a relationship that was abusive, decided to leave. So people that have left their jobs, people that have accompanied people in the moment of death, people that said, I love you, knowing that your heart might get broken. Those are all huge acts of courage. And so we've all been heroes in one shape or way or another. And we often forget, we always think that the others are more courageous and the others have this gift of courage that they can give to others. And no, it's every single person. And if it is really the biggest gift that we can give, and the biggest, the biggest sign of generosity, then my call to action for everyone is to really reflect where have you been courageous in your life, and how can you be of dana? How can you be that gift of generosity, of courage and fearlessness to others around you?
Beautiful. Yes, please. Yes. All of us live that every day, right? Okay, thank you, Julian. Becca, maybe we'll go to you. I know we've been kind of popcorning the questions, but any last thoughts you want to share with this group, reflections?
Sure. I think, one of them is, Marisa's book is called Grief is Love. But I think we all have a lot of work to do to help to explain to the broader public that, the other side of grief is love, and grief work is love work. It's, it's work of the heart. And so I know I want to, continue championing that. And I think all of us can be a part of helping to even explain or communicate that to others. Because I think that loss and adversity can be really misunderstood sort of in that way. And then I guess the only other thing that I'll say is that I do think people who have been through loss and adversity are also amazing role models for supporting others and supporting other people. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's my friends who have gone through the hardest things that are the first to sign up for the meal train. They're the first to Venmo you money when you're having a hard day, like all of the little actions that keep us going. And so I think, those are things that everyone can do. But I also think people who have experienced loss and adversity can really be on sort of the front lines of showing us how to take good care of each other. And so I know that's something else that Option B cares about deeply, is information about how to support others, what to do, what to say, how to show up. And it's something that's really important to me as well.
Yes, we're all carrying that flag, aren't we? And thank you for the work at Option B to help provide more tools and resources for that. So Marisa, there was a question that just came through, and it was a question that we didn't get to around your work as an former appointee for the Obama administration, and the work that you're doing around racial equity and women and African-American women. So just want to bring that in at the end here. We have we still have 5 more minutes before we go into, I think, Q&A. Is there anything you want to share with this group about that space that you're advocating for so many?
Yeah. So a few things. First of all, I just want to say that I hope folks are really able to extend some grace to themselves. If you are in it and dealing with grief and loss or hardship really of any kind, I hope you can be gracious with yourself. That is another one of the key themes in Grief is Love. And I thought about it when Jennifer, I saw, left a comment in the chat about wanting to get back to service, and shared, all of these really challenging things that she's been dealing with. And I hope that when you're, really in the midst of it, you will give yourself permission to just be there and know that opportunities to serve and give back and do other things, they'll be there down the line when, you know, you've had some time and space to just be and heal. I decided I was going to write a book in 2008. That book did not come out until 2022. I decided a couple months before my mom died that I needed to work for Barack Obama. That didn't happen for another 2 years. You know, give yourself some grace is my sort of closing thought. And then on the racial inequality and sort of poverty, broader social injustice pieces, those are all things to grieve too. So give yourself permission to have a lot of complicated feelings when things are happening in the world that you know aren't right, that aren't okay, that aren't just, and that are harming either yourself or your community or just other human beings, because it's not okay. And I always try and push folks to give themselves space to sort of process the feelings before turning that outrage, frustration, grief, etc., into action of some kind. And so in my work, I've been really fortunate to be close to a lot of heartbreaking issues. And I bring my experiences with grief and loss into all of those conversations and, you know, all of the strategy sessions with the CEOs of large nonprofits and social justice organizations, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's all grief work.
Beautiful. Thank you for creating that space for all of us for grace. And the work is endless. I would love to keep this conversation going with all of you. We just barely scratched the surface, but I do want to make sure that we have time for questions. So Misha, I'm calling in from my phone, so I'm just seeing them real time as they come in. Do you want to prompt any questions that you are reading that look like something we'd want to have a conversation around?
Yes, I will keep my eyes peeled in the chat. Please drop your questions. I actually, as they start rolling in, I have a question of my own, if it's okay to ask. I'm wondering, and this can go to any of our panelists or perhaps all, if someone does, you know, they're feeling ready to explore helping others, they're just starting, you know, to emerge from the depths of their grief and they're feeling emotionally prepared to do so, but they don't necessarily know where to start. What would you recommend?
Does anyone have a thought? I can jump in. I'll start, and then if anyone else does. I would say find a space that you feel a connection to, and a cause, a purpose, suffering that you feel drawn to. That's always a good way to find, you know, a path. I'll just say my short story was that after our son Lars died at George Mark, I would speak and advocate for George Mark for fundraising and speak about the loss of our son to help build awareness that this happens and we can go on and live wholehearted lives. And I joined the board in 2020. And then at that point that turned into this position. So go where you feel pulled would be my thoughts on that one.
Yeah. And I will just add one additional note to go where you feel pulled. Go in the direction of your practical strengths as well. You know, when my mom was dying from breast cancer, I was, 22, 23 years old. I was basically a child for all intents and purposes. I now realize, and I didn't have a ton of professional skills because I was just entering the workforce, but I was, for better or worse, like very well known for socializing and parties and organizing fun things for people to do. And so I started out throwing like ridiculous parties in New York City to raise money for breast cancer. And that turned into a nonprofit that's now part of the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. And so, go where you feel pulled and leverage whatever your innate skills and talents happen to be.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Lean into your strengths, right? Yes. As in many things. Yes. Julian, did you want to add something?
Sometimes I feel like service can be such a loaded word, and sometimes service can entail you sharing your story and to people in your inner circle. And just I remember going back to work even after my father passed away, and you sharing your story can be of service and can be of support of other people who are going through something similar. And having seen you or seeing you re-emerge from that abyss can be of great strength and encouragement to someone who's maybe a few steps behind, right in the abyss, or is about to go into the abyss. And it's something that helped me tremendously, people who shared their stories with me. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I guess I'll close us out. I would say 2 things. I would say, one, don't be afraid to start small. Marisa kind of spoke to this, but it might be volunteering or supporting a friend, or deciding that you don't want to do your job anymore. You would like to do something else. I don't think there's really a one size fits all answer, but I think starting small can build up to bigger things. And then I think when I think about my own experience, I don't think I was necessarily immediately seeking service. I was seeking community. And that's really what, my work before Option B with the dinner party, what that was all about. It was an opportunity to connect with other people who were going through loss. And through that, through being part of a community, that is sort of what led me to service. I ended up volunteering with them, and then I ended up working for them. And again, not everyone takes that same path. But I'm not sure I could see my own path to service directly after loss. I don't know about for other people, but I think for me, finding like-minded people and finding community and realizing I was in a new normal myself. And so how could I surround myself with people who were also in new normals, or who were recognizing my new normal? That was really helpful. And I think it then propelled me in the direction of service.
Thank you so much for all asking my question. I do see another question in the chat, which I think would be nice for all of you to answer as well. What are some acts of service that were directed towards you during your experiences of loss and grief? Maybe one of the ones that stood out in particular. I'm sure there were many. Maybe starting with Marisa again.
Gosh, I have been so fortunate when it comes to grief support. My editor literally had me take examples out of my book because she was like, this is not normal for people to show up in this way. But we've gotten the meals, we've gotten all sorts of thoughtful gifts, people just showing up and sitting with you. And the way that whenever I get a question in an interview, that's usually, how do I show up for others when they're going through the worst thing? I point to 3 categories of support. One is just that physical being there, even if you're not ready to talk about it. My girlfriend's showing up the night we found out about our pregnancy loss, with Chinese food and chocolate chip cookie dough, and we watched bad TV, and it was amazing. The other is just the practical support. People dropping off food, coming by to clean your house, watching your kids, walking the dog. Those types of things are really important because the science behind grief and loss shows that the way that your body and your brain are processing the loss make it hard for you to do other things. All of us have been there. We all know that is true, and grief brain is a real thing. So those things are very helpful. And then the third category that is one of my personal favorites is doing something for someone or giving someone a gift that either connects them to the person or thing that they've lost, or just reminds them of who they are beyond this horrible situation. Like my girlfriend who sent me black Santa Claus earrings after our pregnancy loss. It was the most perfect gift ever, but definitely not a traditional grief gift. So those are some of my examples and things I would suggest for others.
Thank you, Marisa. Shekinah, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I would. You've described some of which I have received, and also now that I have gone through loss, showing up even when people aren't ready, just something on their doorstep or a message or a note. Often people who are going through a deep loss don't know what they need. They need space, they need time, but you showing up with something for them, time, space, a friend to talk to, is super powerful. So everything you've shared, I've experienced, and I've tried to do the best I can as well. It's powerful to be able to do that. So all beautifully said. Nothing else to add.
I can jump in, and yeah, I think Marissa's summary was perfect. I can talk about an example that helped me through grief, actually through my father's death, and then the same person and also helped me throughout during my illness, which was the hospice nurse that was with us during my father's illness up until the last moment. And I actually got a chance to speak to her yesterday, and we're still very, very close. We're still very, very close. And her presence, her generosity, she said only in her entire career she only changed the clothes of two people after they passed away. One was my father, one was a 6-year-old boy that she was working with. And she had really connected with my father, and she really connected with me. And now, years later, me being able to say how much this has meant for me, how much courage this has given to my mother to be able to be in that difficult moment, and even to my dad while he was passing. It's what a gift. What a tremendous gift. And yeah, she's leaving a legacy behind that is, I mean, all of these people, everyone working in end of life, the legacy they leave behind is just, yeah, is yeah, I have no words to describe it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Indeed.
I can't remember who asked this question. I'm trying to scroll up to see.
It was Nicole.
Nicole, thank you for asking this, because I just felt like a wave of emotion. Thinking about, you know, the people who showed up for me and the very simple acts and what that looked like. And I quickly scribbled down 3 that came to mind, but there are so many more. I think it really, you know, takes a village. And Marisa, I'm kind of sad that it got taken out of your book. Like this idea that these examples are like too big or too much, or people would never do that. I'm like, why? Like why? We actually need better models for how to show up for people. So so yeah, you can share that with your editor if you want. I think for
Book
me, exactly. And book number 2. But you know, some things for me, you know, I was at work when I found out that my mom was put into hospice, and I could barely like move or think or do anything. And I had a couple of colleagues who just like literally walked me to the train, got on the train with me, helped me go home. Like very basic, you know. I've had friends who called me and said, you know, you're going to take the rice cracker and then you're going to put peanut butter on the rice cracker. Then you're going to put it in your mouth. Like, I think, you know, especially when you present as a strong, high functioning person, people who are able to get on the level and truly understand of like what it means to be devastated and what you need in those moments of devastation. I think like those are the examples that really stand out to me. And then one thing, just in terms of what support might look like, not in the moment, but years later, my longtime best friend, platonic life partner, Thomas, who's a dear, dear person in my life. He knew that my mom loved lilacs, and I can't remember if it was I want to say it was for Mother's Day or her birthday, some anniversary of her death, like some sort of major day. He went and he clipped off lilacs from a neighbor's yard without permission. But I woke up the next morning and there was just a vase of lilacs sitting there, you know. And I think those kinds of things are so beautiful and especially meaningful, I think, when they happen after the flood of initial support. But you know, random days or days that are important down the line. So those are some things that come to mind for me.
Beautiful. Sounds like others also felt the connection to lilacs. Julia wrote that. My mother loved lilacs too. And the last thing I'll add also is the continuum of support is long, right? It's not just in this acute phase. It's really after the flutter of all the things. And then that's when the loss really settles in. So it's ongoing, as we all know. So, okay, I think now we are going to wrap up and pass it back to Misha to talk about some next steps. But I just want to thank everyone for just your generosity and the grace and the conversation and the flexibility with the networks and all that. But thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Becca and Marisa and Julian. Such a pleasure to share the space with you. Thank you, Reimagine, for hosting us. And thank you, Misha.
Thank you. Cool.
Pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Shekinah, and thank you, Becca, Julian, and Marisa. It's really been a wonderful session. I'm deeply moved by the comments in the chat, and I think it's been a really supportive and safe space for the community, whether they're just sitting with their grief right now and being, or whether they're ready to explore their acts of service. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm excited now to share some resources that our speakers and their respective organizations have for all those here and all those watching the recording. You can follow Option B on Instagram and Option B Community on Facebook for daily storytelling and practical advice on how to navigate loss and hardship and support loved ones through those experiences. Marisa, you can find her book at bookshop.org and also on Amazon. You can find her at marisareneelee.com and Marisa Renee Lee on Instagram. And I will be dropping some links in the chat as we go through this, so you can find these resources. And again, they will be in the follow-up email. Next slide, please, Nicole. For a thought-provoking conversation on courage, psychedelics, and death, you can watch Julian's interview with Jose Maria Bernal on YouTube or listen to it on Spotify. And for more information on retreats, you can visit retreated.com. I'll paste those in the chat. And for resources provided by George Mark Children's House, you can learn more about them at georgemark.org. And this summer, George Mark Children's House have launched its Hummingbird Project, a special fund designed to expand its programs to ensure the house is humming with memory-making programs and activities like art, music, swimming, and pet therapy, all of which bring so much joy and enhance the quality of life for all who stay at George Mark Children's House. Hummingbirds have a special meaning for George Mark's patients, families, and staff. These tiny flyers signify healing, comfort, and hope, especially when we need it most. And the George Mark Gardens are alive with hummingbirds. So I invite you to learn more about the fund at georgemark.org/hummingbird project. And you can also follow George Mark on social media as well. And we're excited to share the next two events coming up in our Transforming Adversity into Acts of Service August series. We have the Let's Experience workshop on August 16th with Peter Walkers. He is Prison Yoga Project yoga teacher. And then we'll also have Julian returning on August 29th with his colleague Sabina for Let's Take Action, Discovering Your Service Path, where you can define some small steps that you might want to take as a result of hearing other people's experiences and being inspired. So we hope to see you there. We will be sharing registration links in the follow-up email as well. Thank you so much all for joining. On behalf of the entire Reimagine staff, as a nonprofit organization, we do rely on your support to put on these free events. And so we're grateful for your continued support. And you can also find other ways to get involved by emailing us at hello@letsreimagine.org or visiting our website, letsreimagine.org. Thank you all again for being here. It's been a beautiful session. And we hope to see you at another Reimagine event or elsewhere very soon. Thank you, everyone.